Must be the French and, in fact, Europe's security service worst nightmare come alive. What they've long feared has now come to fruition.
Indeed, it has. Now, 127 people in a set of coordinated attacks on 6 positions in the city of Paris on Friday night is the worst act of violence that the French have seen since the Second World War. Back in January, we saw attacks here of a similar nature, of radical Islamist extremists attacking the Charlie Hebdo, the satirical magazine, back in January, and now there's a series of attacks. But these ones are feeling slightly different. Clearly, they were coordinated. There was more of them. There were suicide bombs involved. It was also in areas of Paris which are very Parisian. They're not necessarily tourist areas or landmarks. These are places where Parisians live. There were shots fired against restaurants in towns, parts of Paris which the French people are living and going about their normal lives. So it feels very much like an attack against the French society, and the Islamic State has said that that's exactly what it is. It's against the French airstrikes in Syria on their targets.
But Jack, these are not actually new tactics, are they? It brings to mind the Mumbai attacks we saw about 7-8 years ago in India. France itself, by my count, has seen about 10 or 11 attacks since March 2012. These, of course, include shootings, stabbings, and vehicle rammings, etc. How did the perpetrators go undetected this long? Perhaps it's just that the intelligence and security personnel, as you say, were centered around national symbols and landmark spaces of importance, and not random pubs and eateries which were targeted here.
Indeed, the question will be, after the Charlie Hebdo attacks and after the country being put on high alert, how was this allowed to happen? There will be some questions. A set of coordinated attacks in this sense, there will be questions asked of the French security services and the intelligence services as well. Having said that, the French have raised their capacity to perform surveillance operations in recent months in order to try to crack down on terrorist attacks, but that clearly hasn't worked. Now, this is indeed very kind of reminiscent of the Mumbai attacks with the kind of multiple locations. The Islamic State says that they have coordinated this, and the French President Francois Hollande, he said that he believes that the attacks were put together outside of France with help from people within France. There'll also be some questions about who performed these attacks. We're hearing some unconfirmed reports that a passport next to one of the bodies of the attackers who were shot dead at one of the locations was a Syrian passport. So that would lead us to believe, that he is an Islamic State fighter from Syria, and also that we're wondering whether there will definitely be questions asked about whether some of these people have arrived through the refugee flows into the European Union that we've been seeing over the last few months.
And Jack, if that Syrian link is indeed proven, how will France maneuver, do you think? Will they recoil from that conflict in Syria, or will they redouble their commitment to the fight against ISIS there?
So what we're hearing from French President Francois Hollande is that they will not back away from tackling the Islamic State and that they will fight. He said that these attacks were an act of war and that the French will respond with all appropriate measures within the international frameworks to respond and to stamp out the Islamic State. So the rhetoric is huge, and clearly there are high emotions. 127 Parisians at least, or not necessarily Parisians, but people have died here on the streets of Paris in these attacks, and so there will be a clear sense that a strong response needs to happen. The French will see this as an attack on their way of life, on their sense of freedom, on their liberty, and that's something that's dear to the French, and they will not be happy. There will be a response, and it doesn't look like the French president will in any sense remove himself or step back from the airstrikes in Syria that the Islamic State say caused these attacks.
All right, that was our correspondent Jack Parrock, who's in Paris right now, tracking that developing story for us. Let's move on to some other news. Earlier, SABC News spoke to Rufence Shearness, Group Executive of Corporate Affairs at the Airports Company South Africa, about flights from South Africa to Europe.